This is for the two at-large seats elected by the entire city from Ward 6. To my right is City Councilor Vicki Danberg. She's lived here since 1977. She served the city as an alderman and a councilor at large now for 16 years. She's chair of the Real Property Reuse Committee, vice chair of Zoning and Planning, and is a charter member of the Newton Cultural Alliance. To her right is a challenger. That's Alicia Bowman. She's a longtime advocate focusing on schools, transportation, housing, and the environment. PTO President in the past, co-founded Safe Route to School a dozen years ago, and she's been a member of the Mayor's Transportation Advisory Committee for 8 years and is president of Bike Newton. And she's running for City Council for the first time. And to her right is City Councilor Greg Schwartz. He is a primary care physician at Brigham and Women's Hospital, and he cares for adults of all ages, and, I did not know this, is also an attorney. He's married, and he has 2 daughters at the Brown Middle School. So let's start. Why don't we start with the challenger? And 2 of these people will be elected on November 5th to serve on the City Council. Alicia, Councilor Schwartz, Councilor Danberg, they're veterans of the council. They seem to have done a very respectable job. Why are you running?
So I am running because as a longtime advocate in the city for our schools and for transportation and housing and on climate, I feel we are not moving fast enough on to resolve these issues. And I bring a lot of experience, obviously, as an advocate, and past professional experience as a consultant. And we need more leadership on these ideas. We need to stop talking about what we'd like to do, and we need to start taking more definitive action. We have a housing crisis, we have a transportation crisis, and we have a climate crisis, and we need real action. That's why I'm running.
All right, thank you very much. Let's start with Councilor Danberg. Is there a housing crisis? Is there a transportation crisis in Newton, in the region? Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would agree that there is a huge housing crisis and we have a transportation crisis. The City of Newton needs to, unfortunately, rely on the state for much of the funding that will be given to the MBTA and the buses that traverse the city. But there are many things that we can do to alleviate this crisis. When we, for example, work with developers, as we are now working with the Northland Company, we have required that they provide a free shuttle, not only for the people who would live in that community, but also for anyone who wants to get on it. But there are many things that need to be done. Yes, we have a housing crisis. We need to resolve that. And yes, we have a transportation crisis.
Thank you very much. Councilor Schwartz, would you agree with Alicia's statement that the City Council, the city, has been lagging on dealing with the issues of environment, climate, transportation, and housing? Should the city be doing more? How can it do more?
Well, thank you, Andy, for that question. And I think that that's actually a very appropriate question, because when people talk about leadership, you have to think about what the City Council actually has the power to do. I'm chairman of the Land Use Committee, which you didn't get a chance to mention, but in the last 2 years, I've been chair of the Land Use Committee. I've been on the Land Use Committee for the last 8 years. We don't generate the projects that come before us. Those have to come before us by private developers who want to build. So as leaders, we can't lead the production of housing. What we can do is and we're required to do, is look at each proposal as it comes before us and consider it on its merits and make a decision. Separately, on transportation, we certainly do have some control, like Vicki mentioned, but and we can require certain things. We can try to create a shuttle program with funds from private developers, but we can't make the MBTA spend more money on us. And then third, just on the environment, we have been very active. In fact, this last term, As Vicki mentioned, we started to address the climate change after a very, very full report came to us from the Citizens Commission on climate change.
All right.
And we are working very hard on that. We also passed solar panels and energy efficiency in all municipal buildings.
I'm going to stop you there, but we're going to follow up on this subject. So you said that and yes, land use committee chairman, and that is a difficult job. Having watched those hearings for years, it's probably one of the toughest. But yes, the city does react to a marked development, Robert Korf, purchasing properties along Washington Street and then proposing Washington, what is now becoming Washington Place, rising up. That said, the city can take a proactive approach in terms of zoning reform. Let's get into the zoning reform. I guess the most controversial aspect of it is to allow multifamily housing in areas, I guess you might call them overlay districts, around some of the village centers. Are you in favor of that in principle, or is it something that you would just look at on a case-by-case basis?
Well, no, there are two different halves of the same question, and I agree with you that land use takes care of the particular projects, but zoning, which Vicki, as you mentioned, is vice chair of and has been on for a very long time, is working very hard on making those reform proposals happen. We did have that pushed back until next term because the mayor felt that the planning department was overworked at that point. We've been dealing with the Washington zoning vision. And in that vision, I am supportive of putting some high-density housing in the locations that are appropriate for it, such as village centers. Transit centers, exactly. But as far as it being by right all along the corridor at very high heights, I'm not in favor of that. I think we need to have special permit control over that.
Let me ask Councilor Danberg. Is the city taking too long with the zoning reform? I mean, I started following things closely maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and talking about it then. Is the city taking too long?
I've heard that criticism also. No, the city is not taking too long because it's been 30 years since we've had a major overhaul of the zoning code. We have to get this right. We should not look at a December 31 deadline and say, let's throw the rest of this zoning code together so that we can make the December 31 deadline. We have issues that we've got to make sure we get correct for the city of Newton. Zoning, for example, used to be use-based. Zoning came in 1916 in New York so that you couldn't put a pig farm next to a sandbox. Now we're looking at context-based zoning, which is what does this building look like in comparison with the other buildings around it? That's what we have to finish and get right. We've completely redone the zoning code from start to finish.
Let's ask Alicia. She is chomping at the bit to respond to this. Let me ask you a specific question. Would you support, as a member of the City Council, allowing by right multifamily housing in some of these overlay districts around village centers, Newton Highlands, Newton Center, et cetera?
Super quick, I'm going to say absolutely yes, and then I'd like to get back to the question on timing. So I am actually, as much as I decided to run because I thought we were not moving fast enough on some of these issues. I'm really glad that zoning reform was pushed off to next term because I really hope to be there to help formulate the new zoning. What was clear to me in participating in listening into the zoning meetings that were happening is there was not agreement among the 24 city councilors as to the purpose of doing the rezoning. So it felt very difficult to me to understand how we were going to get appropriate zoning if we didn't even have agreement among the 24 city councilors. What was the purpose? Is it some councilors feel that the purpose of rezoning is to stop more building from happening? And some city councilors, the ones that I would find myself aligned to, see that zoning is a very important tool that can be used to address climate change, address housing, and address our transportation challenges.
We'll stay on a similar subject. I asked this of Lisa Gordon and Councilor Noel. Is Newton Center lacking a certain vitality in terms of, I guess, foot traffic and a variety of businesses if you don't need your nails done or your, deposit a check in the bank. Let's start with Councilor Schwartz, and then we'll move down, and then you can respond to one another.
Sure. Thank you, Andy. I think that Newton Center does lack a certain vitality. I think that we can do a lot better. I mean, obviously, the evenings are a little bit more visibly vital now with more of the restaurants, and that's terrific. It is creating a little bit of difficulty with the parking, but we're working through that. And the proliferation of banks has definitely been a downer for the center. There was a time when there was a grocery store, a movie theater,
Academy Cinema,
and that might not happen. But in this context of retail being so limited because of Amazons of the world, but we certainly can try to do a better job. And I think that there is a certain kind of critical mass that you need, and so increasing housing that's close to the center is absolutely something that will help that.
Let me ask Alicia, and the same question, I'll phrase it a little differently. Would it be a good thing if Newton Center was 20% like Coolidge Corner? Would that be a good thing?
Okay, I'm not sure.
In terms of having like a liveliness and different places for people to go and people walking around and more walkability, livability, et cetera.
So if you're talking about making because I think every village center is going to have its own unique vibe. I think that what's currently there is not quite as nice as what was there when I first moved here 23 years ago. I'd like to go and walk to the butcher. I would walk to the produce market. I do like some of the new restaurants, though. I do have to say we've upgraded the restaurants a bit. And I agree with Councilor Schwartz that providing more housing there would certainly help that situation. I also just think physically, as someone who's spent many years working on transportation issues, it is not a comfortable place to walk around. It is not the kind of place that you comfortably would come and park your car once and then walk around. And so if we want it to be
different intersections.
The different
major
intersections.
roads,
So if we make that a more pleasant place to be, it needs trees, it needs better crossings, it needs needs less cars driving through it. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. And
Now,
it's
let me follow up,
Yep.
though. How do you get less cars driving through Newton Center when it's a major cut through to Brookline,
So I
Brighton?
think one thing that you do is it's going to be multiple. So one is not forcing people to really drive into the center to park. So that'll take out some of it. So we should, if people are going to come to Newton Center, we should do more parking on the periphery. So to make better use of the Pelham, Pleasant, and Cypress Street lots. We should be making it safer and easier for people to bike. And that pinch point for people, and we have people who bike from Waban to the Longwood Medical Center along Beacon Street, and the worst section of their entire ride is that section that goes through Newton Center. Okay. So that's, and more obviously options for public transportation.
Councilor Danberg, you moved here in 1977 when Newton Center, from my memory, was a very different place and was a little bit more vibrant, and there were more people walking around. That's my memory's eye. What is your thought on the state of Newton Center as a business district, as a place where people live, and if it's not good enough, what should we be doing?
Yes, first of all, 25 or 30 years ago, the city had 2 people in the planning department whose jobs were simply and exclusively to look at the mix of the shops and stores in every one of our villages and to go out and find businesses that were needed in those villages. We had people looking for grocery stores, looking for hardware stores, et cetera, and that's why we had a wonderful mix for many years. We don't have that now. We have 28 hair salons and, 14 banks, count them. We've got now 2 banks in the Pete's building. There is not a good mix. We need, and thank you, by the way, for whoever complimented the number of restaurants in Newton Center. I fought very hard about 10 years ago to change things so that we could get it was actually the parking requirement so that we could get more restaurants into Newton Center.
So would reforming zoning around Newton Center in an overlay district to allow multifamily housing, which would then bring in more people, more foot traffic potentially. Is that something you'd support?
Absolutely. I've been saying that for years, and I think that what we should do, years ago, 50 years ago, there were 4-story buildings in Newton Center. We are such an affluent community that we were able to tear them down because the way that they were taxed before was not by, it was by square footage. It was not by income. And so you had 3 floors of vacant apartments up top, and so we tore those down and replaced them with 1-story buildings that now have to change, and we need to get more height, more and the ability to put housing above the shops and retail.
Councilor Schwartz.
Thank you, Andy. I just wanted to make a couple comments on those points. So one is that I want to give Alicia a shout out because the bump outs that exist across from Panera and where Langley crosses Center Street are making a huge difference. I feel much safer. I walk through there all the time. Sometimes I'm not sure the cars are going to stop, but absolutely they have made it much more visible for the car traffic that's coming through. I also want to point out that beautification and trees was mentioned by Alicia. Vicki has been a leader in beautifying Newton Center. She's the one who's gotten the businesses to donate to the triangle and the nice garden there, which is really quite remarkable. You mentioned Coolidge Corner, and I lived in Coolidge Corner actually as a young medical resident, and I can tell you that they're changing too, unfortunately. It's the same kind of large issues, the retail, loss of retail, the rising rents. It's become a much different place than it used to be. So it's not clear how we can fight those trends entirely, but definitely making the buildings, a couple more stories up around the center makes a lot of sense. One caveat on that, though, I would point out, is we're seeing this with Washington Place. When you tear down and build a new building, the rents for those retail spaces are quite high, and you lose a lot of the local businesses. And that's why in Washington Place, we tried to come up with a formula, and the developer has actually agreed to set aside 10,000 square feet for non-formula retail, but that's only by allowing a bank.
And kudos to the Land Use Committee on that.
Alicia, you had a response?
So I was just going to say, going back to a much earlier comment, but obviously within the realm of development, Councilor Schwartz referenced that the Land Use Committee can only respond, or the City Council can only respond to what comes before them. But I think that there's a lot of opportunity for better leadership in this. And just thinking about housing, and I went back today, Newton is part of Metro Mayors Coalition, so these are 15 mayors that across the greater Boston area that have come together to say that they are going to be part of the solution, the 185,000 units that we need to build, housing units we need to build by 2030. And they have laid out some very important things that need to happen, and charging us with stakeholder and municipal engagement to help residents understand the need for housing and how we're going to get there, and improving housing production and talking about housing affordability. So these are things that we can lead on. True leadership will help people in our community better understand what can be done there.
Vicki, did you have any response to any of this? You don't have to. I can move on to the next question.
I think that everything that's been said is on track.
Can I add one thing?
Yeah, go ahead.
So Alicia talks about leadership, and I appreciate the fact that obviously we have to lead as a city, but the city councilors don't do quite as much as the mayor does when it comes to leading on that issue. I mean, as far as producing housing, the mayor is the one who actually gets the developers to come, tries to encourage them. Certainly we are, 24 of us can certainly talk about that, but it's not really going to generate the same kind of interest from the developers. I mean, it's just not. And so to talk about leadership that's somehow lacking is just not fair, I don't think. I mean, I think that you can imagine that the city council has more power than it has, but it doesn't.
All right.
I'd like to comment on that.
Go ahead, and then
Yes.
you can go, Alicia.
Developers come first to the planning department. They sit down with the planning department and they discuss what they'd like to do. They get the opinion of the planning department, and then they go to the chief administrative officer and the mayor.
Okay.
So that is the way it happens.
Alicia.
So what residents have been asking for whenever a big project comes before the city council is, where is the strategic plan that lays out what needs to get done and what we would like to get done, and how are we helping to move that forward? So yes, you might not be going out and talking to individual contractors and developers to come in and build something, but we can certainly lead better in making sure that we have, as a city council, are helping to make sure that we do more planning, individual planning, taking from the comprehensive plan and breaking down and moving forward.
Councilor Danberg, then Councilor Schwartz, and then we're going to move on to a new question.
Thank you. Mayor Fuller did the first real strategic plan that we have for an area when she got the vision plan for Washington Street done. That was a $500,000 endeavor. The next area that's going to be looked at, there are a number of areas that the city needs to do a strategic plan on. One of the next areas, if not the next area, will be Newton Center. And that will be inevitably another $500,000 plan. In the past, we never did major strategic planning for this city. We all know that it needs to be done. We've made a big stride in getting the first place done. We're now going to look at Newton Center. We'll look at all of the other villages and the other strategic areas. It's a question of money.
Greg, you had a response also?
I just wanted to mention, so it's true, and the comprehensive plan has been kind of this document that has kind of been a little squishy and a little bit dated, so we are updating that. We did do a vision plan for Needham Street that took a couple years and was actually helpful in getting the community's involvement, the stakeholders, to try to point out what we're looking for on Needham Street. The project that we have has been partially responsive to that, so it's been an excellent, I think, example.
Okay.
Riverside, a number of councilors, me included, pushed hard that we should get a vision plan for that done before we took up the Riverside development, and that was done on relatively short time with, I think some good
All right.
output.
Alicia, did you have anything to add to this, or can we move on to the next question? This is an interesting topic.
I'm
Okay.
sure we'll have
All right,
a
it's
chance to
related.
loop back in. Let's go on
It
to
is
these
related,
topics.
as so much of the
Thank
debate
you.
in Newton is
Yes, thank you for
very
doing that.
interesting. There is a proposal, a plan. It's been floated around for a while. I know that this was being thought of during Seti Warren's administration as well. That would allow an appointed planning and development board to act on smaller special permit applications, I believe is it 20 or less units?
Yes.
And I'm assuming as well for some of these special permits for just pretty common renovations, expansions, et cetera. Start with Councilor Danberg. Would you approve that?
Thank you. The Land Use Committee now meets more than any other committee. They meet all summer long. They meet every 2 weeks.
Every week.
I'm sorry, yes, every
Sometimes.
week in many cases. A lot of these items that have to be taken up by the Land Use Committee and spent a tremendous amount of time on are the mudrooms, the little extensions, that type of thing. The Land Use Committee should not be required to do all of those small projects. These can easily be done by an administrator, a trained person in the planning department at the counter.
Let me follow up, and you guys can all answer this as well. But yes, and I think we used to, it was a joke in the newsroom. I mean, like the Land Use Committee is having to deal with putting in a screen door in the garage or whatever, and that's not necessarily true. But I'm making the point. But 20 units is substantial. Maybe some people would say that's not such a good idea. That should still go through the regular special permitting process where you have, need a 2/3 majority of the city council. Go ahead.
Okay, so there are 351 communities in Massachusetts, and only 15 of them have an elected body making these types of decisions, and Newton is one of them. So beyond just having the largest elected body in the state, we have an elected body who's making sometimes very small decisions. I think 20 units, which was what had been proposed at one of the zoning and planning meetings, is could be very reasonable, assuming we had good zoning, rezoning in place, and so that we understood what areas we were looking to target to allow multi-units, and we have a good idea around setbacks and other constraints.
Thank you, Andy. So I think that it is true that there are a number of things that come before us on land use, which I've been on for all 8 years, so I can tell you those are a lot of meetings, may not need to come to us. I would say, though, that the uniqueness of Newton with the planning, the special permit authority being in the council actually makes those larger projects much more responsive to community concerns and actually community knowledge and experience, which even on some of the small projects, I've got to tell you, our professional planners, I love them and they're really terrific and they're very well skilled, but they often don't get what is going on in the neighborhood and they don't pick up on some of the concerns that actually need to be addressessed.
What are you basing that statement on?
8 years of watching as they say, well, we didn't know that that's a tough, tight street. Oh, the emergency vehicles can't get down the street. We've got parking on both sides. There's a curb cut there that actually is going to interfere with kids and stuff like that. So it's very important that there's that involvement by the citizenry. And I think that an appointed body just doesn't have the same accountability.
Alicia?
I think that if it's necessary for a city councilor to get involved, maybe the city councilor could attend the meetings with the appointed body and make sure that that concerns are heard. But I don't think that we need to take the time of an 8-member elected body who is also dealing with much bigger issues and much bigger projects. And if we're going to meet our need to build, 11,000 plus units here in Newton in the next 10 years, you're going to be pretty busy. So land use is going to be very busy. And so we need you to stay focused on those more important issues and let the others be handled, which I think could very appropriately be handled with an appointed body.
Counselor?
So again, you just don't get the accountability if it's not a voting issue. Now, obviously, with small stuff, totally reasonable. But I just think that there's a misconception that that's like the lion's share of what we do. We really, we've spent the last 13, 14 months on the Northland project. That's not because we had little things that were taking our time. It's because the project's so big and multifaceted and has so many issues that are important to address.
Counselor Danberg, you wanted to...
I would just say that I think that smaller projects need to be taken out of the hands of the Land Use Committee. I think that the very large projects, the Northlands, the Riversides, I wouldn't necessarily go as low as 20 units, but I think that the large projects have done very well being deliberated by the Land Use Committee and then going to the City Council.
Thank you very much. Let's talk about, you mentioned Northland and you mentioned Riverside, and we see Washington Place being built, and a lot of this heated debate started over Austin Street, which was a different public-private. But someone mentioned that in 1962, Newton had its peak population of about 90,000 people, and you could see that real growth in the population, really starting from after the Civil War. You'd have major growth. Now I think we're very close to 90,000 people again. Is there a way to, to know when is enough? Now you said 11,000, so let's say that's another 25,000 people. That would bring us to 115,000 or so. Can we accommodate that many people and the services that are necessary? Public schools, roads, traffic. I'll start with Councilor Danberg.
We can't stop people from having babies. My husband is a pediatric dentist, and he has pretty much predicted all the trends. He can tell when the moms come in and the dads come in and they're towing little kids, or when they're not. We have a regional population that is growing. We have a regional population, regional housing crisis. We must do our part with all of the other cities and towns to build housing to house these people who not only want to live in Newton, want to come into Newton to live, but our own children who want to come back and live in this city someday. There aren't enough housing options. There isn't enough housing to take care of it. We have to build our way out of this.
How do we build our way out of it?
We have to do it largely in multi-housing, situated near public transit and near villages. That's the only way that we will be able to do it and not wind up with a terrible traffic and congestion problem.
Alicia, go ahead.
So
Go ahead.
I mentioned the 11,000 housing units. Let's talk about how we got there. We are, for every 2.5 new jobs being created in the greater Boston area, we're only creating 1 unit of housing. And it's predicted by 2030 that there'll be an additional 235,000 new jobs in the greater Boston area. And if we don't make room for people to live closer to where the jobs are, it's Boston, Cambridge, Waltham, Newton are some of the biggest employers, people are going to have to drive further and further from work. So we have 4% of our people who drive to work today in the greater Boston area are driving more than 3 hours a day. So we need to create housing. How do we create that housing? Which was another part of your question. So it's going to be a combination of solutions. We need to build more density in our village centers, hopefully near transit or near other amenities where people drive. Half of your driving is driving to the grocery store, into the CVS, and to a restaurant. So being co-located with those would be great. And also more accessory dwelling units. We've updated the accessory dwelling units, but it's not enough it's not easy enough for people to build those housing.
Let me ask Councilor Schwartz, and the original question isn't it? It's a wide question, but how do we know when enough is enough? How big can we get? Can we support 110,000, 120,000 people when what we've seen is the peak of where we are now? Yes, you mentioned the housing crisis. What about the impact, for example, on the roads, on the schools, on the infrastructure, and how do you prevent such a burden being placed on the residents who already live here?
Well, I thought the initial question was, how do you control people from having kids? And I was going to tell you, as a doctor, there are ways, but we're not going to use them.
It's a pill for that.
No, but taking your question, I think growing is you either grow or you die, right? I mean, so cities need to grow, and we do need to grow, and that's why I've supported growth and appropriate housing unit building in the various projects that you mentioned, Austin Street and Washington Place. But you point out that there's a challenge when you do grow. And let me just say, growth is not just important for vitality and diversity of Newton, but it's also important for our budget. We need the revenue from these new people who want to come here. And we all came here, maybe not at the Civil War, but we all came here. So we need to continue to grow. But now on the schools and on the roads. The schools, we are very fortunate, it looks like. I mean, we are just coming through a very high point in the school enrollment, and my kids are actually right on the bubble. So I keep hearing these demographic trends and predictions that the school department has put out there. My 6th grader is going to be in the biggest class in Newton South. And then after her, it's going to start coming down. Mm-hmm. So we do actually luckily have this downslope where we can start. So the schools is one thing, but the other is the roads. And we can do everything we can, and that's what we're trying to do with the Needham Street project, to try to maximize the use of alternate forms of transportation, trying to minimize the use of car trips with multi-use projects and things like this. Right. We're just not convinced that we're going to be able to do that consistently, and that's something that we have to change people's behavior, provide them with other opportunities. We got to get the MBTA to step up to the plate. It's challenging, and so this is a complex issue. It's not a simple one.
What about commercial growth? I'll start with Councilor Danberg. We are taxed with a split rate, where the commercial tax rate is higher than the residential rate. But we don't really, by most accounts, analysis, really have the commercial tax base to do that. How do we resolve this situation? How do we attract commercial growth? And when I say commercial, I don't necessarily mean retail. People sometimes mix them up. Commercial, it could be retail, could be restaurants, could be offices.
We lost TripAdvisor because we did not have the right place to put a company like TripAdvisor, and Needham did. We need to hold on to every square inch of available commercial property that where we can grow our commercial base. Wells Ave is one of the prime examples, but where we could grow, but we're having trouble filling all of the spaces in Wells Ave because it's not hard to, it's difficult to get there. It's isolated. So we've got, as I think one of the earlier people said, we have 3 areas. We've got Riverside, we've got Washington Corridor, and we've got Needham Street, where we can grow our commercial base and put housing. And what we need to do is make sure that we encourage development that also has retail, commercial, and office space, and not just back off and say, okay, we're going to say no to this development, we're not going to work with the developer, and we're going to get just 40B housing that is 100% residential. We need the commercial component.
Let me ask Alicia your opinion from looking on at this. Do you think that there has been a proper balance in these projects of residential versus commercial / retail, considering that the commercial base in the city is really pretty lagging for a city this size?
So the commercial base, one of the reasons that the commercial base is likely lagging is commercial entities want to be close to where people can live too. So I think marrying commercial and living space will, likely, be much more attractive to some of the coming industries and coming jobs. But we might also have to accept that it's going to be difficult to bring the commercial base in the way that we need in order to finance what we need in the city.
Because of rents or because of...
Well, the difficulty of getting here. So
Yeah.
until we're able to solve how do you get here, it's much easier to leave Newton to get to Boston than to come back the other way.
Tell me about
It's very difficult for people to get here. So, one thing that might happen as we have more people living here is there's enough people to make the MBTA get the MBTA's attention and wanting to invest more, or us wanting to able to spend more and more people going to the same locations.
All right.
So that might help
All right.
some, but I think that we're going to have to come up with a plan with if
All right,
we
Vicki,
can't grow that.
and then Greg, and then we're going to move on. Go ahead.
One thing that we haven't really discussed here also is that what banks and commercial and financial institutions want to finance goes in cycles. Back when the Wegmans Plaza was built, there were 2 large residential towers that were supposed to be built in that complex. The reason that they weren't built was that banks were not financing residential because we were coming out of years of
The Great Recession.
The Great Recession. And now we're back into financing, banks are back into financing residential, and it's much more difficult for them to finance commercial.
Councilor Schwartz.
Thank you, Andy. So commercial is, as you say, taxed at a higher rate, and so it's very appealing, and we have a very low commercial percentage in Newton. So I was one, and Councilor Laredo, the president of the council, was another, who I remember multiple meetings and land use talking to, why can't you put more commercial, like at Washington Place, also in this Needham Street development in Northland. What we keep hearing from the developers back at us is there is no viability for a commercial space. They say office is not the market right now. They can't rent it. That even Needham Street, Northland's property, it's only like less than half a mile away from 128. You'd think that that's very appealing. They said if it's not on 128, like TripAdvisor could be, it's not gonna rent.
So what do we do to remedy this?
So it's challenging. Now, one of the good things, at least right now, is that commercial has actually the appraisals, the assessments of commercial versus residential, because the market is so hot in residential, the assessments have actually gone up in residential. So we're actually at the lower rate, still getting a lot of revenue. And with commercial, because the market is such, their assessment's actually gone down. So even at the higher rate, we would not get as much. So it's balancing out a little bit. This is the argument that we're hearing. But we do need to try to save as much as we can of the commercial to hopefully in some later date be able to use it.
It's a really interesting discussion, and we could go on for a while, but we are really short on time. So what we are going to do now is begin to wrap things up. We're going to have each candidate ask a question of one of the other candidates. Please keep the question brief and not a statement. And you can keep your response to the question 30 minutes. 30 seconds, yeah.
It's getting
we could
late.
probably do that with some of these. 30 seconds, excuse me, to a minute or so, and then we'll do the closing remarks. So let's start with Alicia Bowman. A question to either Councilor Schwartz or Councilor Danberg.
So I'm going to ask you, Councilor Schwartz. So you have talked a lot about the fact that you like to hear from everybody and listen to everybody's opinions before you make a decision. Can you please let us know how it is that you get your information from citizens and others on issues?
Okay.
So I think that what you're getting at is I don't have a newsletter, and that is because I have not in the past felt that there's a value in yet another counselor sending out a newsletter telling everybody what's going on. That may be wrong, but that's been my thought, and you know, Vicki and I have felt the same way about this. As far as hearing from people, certainly I hear from people at our land use meetings, at the city council meetings. I'm actually very active in the community with my children at schools, on the soccer fields, at the basketball court. So I am in the community. I hear from people. We get emails from everyone. I think that it's very important to have, actually this is one of the arguments that I felt was important to having, one of the benefits of having a large city council is that we are in the community a lot and we can hear from people.
And
People can hear
Alicia,
from us.
I just want quick,
follow-up.
do you feel that that means you're hearing from a wide variety of voices in the city?
Well, I'm glad you asked that because I think many councilors feel that there's a middle that we are not hearing from. You know, going around and talking to people in this election, I've heard from many, many people who I had not heard their middle ground expressed as much. And we hear from the activists on both sides of the issues, people who are for and people who are against development. Activists are great. I know Alicia counts herself as one, and I think she's a very effective one. But that is not the only viewpoint that we need to hear.
Got it. And I'm going to give the next question to one of the candidates, to Councilor Danberg. Go ahead.
For Alicia, I have been working on the zoning and planning reform package for a long time now. And one of the issues, we still have a lot of tweaking to do. And there is room for it, and it needs to be done. And there is, regarding single-family districts, there is some evidence, and this has been talked about on the planning department, in the planning department and on the zoning and planning committee, that single-family districts have been responsible in part for discrimination, and especially racial discrimination. In your opinion, what's your opinion about this, and how would you suggest that we deal with this in Newton?
Okay, so I did read The Color of Money, which I think was a challenge from a certain citizen in the room, and it was not only single-family zoning, but redlining and the VA benefits.
And just
and all this.
let people know this,
Yeah.
we're talking about things that were going on here in the earlier part of the 1930s, 40s, 50s,
30s,
60s.
40s, 50s, 60s, and beyond. So I think the issue with single-family zoning is that a lot of people feel like you either have single-family zoning or all of a sudden there'll be apartments on every block. There are many ways to achieve greater diversity and more housing. We talked about accessory dwelling units. I think that allowing more homes to be created into two families would be a good way environmentally and sustainably and affordable, to provide more affordable housing. And I think more flexibility in that would be a good thing in our zoning code. So that's.
And so would you do away with or keep single-family zoning?
All right, so I think that I'd be willing to set single-family zoning aside. I
In
don't
certain
think that
districts or
I
near
think that
village
we,
centers
I
or
think
citywide?
I think we could look at it citywide. I think that there are a lot of places in the city where we could, it's a nuance between an accessory dwelling unit that's inside a single-family home, but it's still a single family, or it's a single-family home and we allow it to become a duplex. I've knocked over 2,500 doors across the city, and many homes that I went up to, I was a little confused because it said Unit 1 or Unit 2, and it looked like a single-family home.
Darn.
And it was a two-family home. So I don't know that people, I think a lot of people are tied up in that, but I don't think it's going to change the fabric of our
go
city
ahead.
as much as people
When you were knocking on those doors and talking to those folks, did you tell them that you were interested in getting rid of single-family zoning?
We talked about housing and how housing could be impacted. I think I talked to a lot of people. In fact, my very first coffee that I had was on Floral Street between Walnut and Center Street.
All right.
These are mostly single. Yes.
And I'm not gonna count
yes,
that as your
but
question
These
to
people,
the
but these
candidates.
people were all
right.
interested in how they could turn their two-family homes and add an accessory dwelling unit because they needed to keep their homes more affordable.
Let me move to Councilor Schwartz. A question for one of the candidates, and then we're going to go to closing remarks.
Great, and this is for Alicia as well. So Alicia, you've talked a lot about bringing leadership to the council on housing and development issues. So given that Vicki and I both voted for Austin Street and Washington Place, how would you have led differently on that? Would you have wanted more units? And if so, what was your limit?
Interesting. So I think I would have led by helping a better understanding of what the actual process could happen there. The Austin Street project almost went, it's now 1/3 affordable. It's now, I had the pleasure of attending the opening, which was great, but that project almost failed, moving it from 25% to 33%. I think that there are many more parking spaces that were built at that particular location at Austin Street that it made the apartments more expensive. And
So you would have limited to 25
So-
and not made it 33% affordable?
so no, I think that I would have been very concerned that the project would have gone under. So
But you're happy
it's
it
worked
was
out. It's worked
33%.
out only
So
because
that was
they
leadership
managed
from
to.
the council.
All right.
I don't think it was leadership from the council that got them the extra money.
Are you
but
serious?
it's-
Amy Sangiolo pushed
we're
hard
not going to rehash Austin Street.
So when I think in Washington Place, I think that, I think there was some good work and it finally went through, but it's the length of time that it takes these projects to percolate. And
All right,
this is-
speaking of length of
Yes.
time, we're going to have to,
Perfect.
we have a school committee debate to get to. So we are going to move to final remarks, try to keep it to a minute or so. And let's start with Alicia, go ahead.
Sure. So we have a lot, you've heard tonight that there are a lot of important decisions that Newton needs to move forward on. Housing, schools, what we're going to do about a commercial base, transportation, and climate change. And every person that we elect to city council has to be prepared and willing to lead. And that means they need to understand what the priorities are. They need to be able to think strategically and be willing to work with fellow councilors and residents to develop a shared understanding of the issues and the options, and to be able to build consensus. And building consensus does not mean you're going to get everybody to agree, but you get enough people to agree to move forward and be able to effectively implement that change. And on November 5th, you have a choice to vote for a candidate with those skills. I have many years as a community advocate, and I have a passion and a willingness to do this job, and I ask for your vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Alicia. Councilor Schwartz.
Thank you, Andy. So I think that it's been a great debate, and we appreciate your moderating. It's very interactive, which I really appreciated. It's kind of unusual. Our previous debates were kind of set pieces, so this is really
That's
good. So I would just tell you that, again, I'm a doctor and a lawyer, and in medicine, you have to listen, you have to collect the data, you have to keep your mind, you have to keep an open mind. In law, there's two sides to every case. And so I bring those approaches to my work as a city councilor. I think that it's not my job to impose my viewpoint. I can have my viewpoint, and it certainly informs my my actions and sometimes my decisions. But more importantly, it is hearing the multiplicity of opinions, learning from that, taking the experience of the residents, and trying to come up with the best possible resolution or problem-solving approach that we can have. And that's the role of a city councilor, is a representative, not as an advocate for one point of view or another.
All right, thank you. And finally, Councilor Vicki Danberg.
Thank you very much. First of all, I want to thank you for moderating, and I want to thank everyone who organized this and put this on. I think this has been a great afternoon and a terrific opportunity for us all to speak. I am very excited about running again, and I am extremely proud of my accomplishments. In talking about leadership, I have led the effort to keep the sidewalks clear in winter. In this past 6 months alone, I have put the Sustainable Products Ordinance into being. We are now requiring that restaurant takeout containers not be polystyrene. This is a huge leap for environmental improvement. I have been instrumental in creating the first 5-year financial forecast in the city a number of years ago. I have worked for and supported housing, environment, bike pedestrian safety, schools, renewable energy, and many other things that I won't take the time to list. I am chair of real property reuse, vice chair of zoning and planning, and I ask for your vote to return me to do this important work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks to all the candidates.